A racist cop walks into a school with a forced smile and a loaded ego, dragging behind him the weight of unchecked power and privilege. He says he's there to talk to the students, but that's not why he's really there. No. He's there because someone exposed him. A 14-year-old black girl filmed him 2 weeks ago violently arresting a classmate outside of school, a boy who did nothing, who was only guilty of walking home while black. She sent the video to the school board anonymously, and word got around. Parents talked. Teachers whispered. Some praised her. Others got nervous. But he knew. He knew it was her. And today, he came to get even. He didn't come with a warrant. He didn't come with authority. He came with audacity. And he came during third period. She was walking back from the restroom, headphones on, her box braids bouncing over her shoulders, unaware of what was waiting for her in the cafeteria. As she stepped inside, everything changed. The cop was already holding the microphone, standing next to the principal, a man who never liked her confidence, her pride, her voice. The whole school had been called in for a surprise assembly about discipline and respect. And then it started. Some of you, the cop said, his voice booming through the speakers, think you can break the rules. Think you can act like you're above authority. But guess what? Actions have consequences. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She was still standing by the doorway, half in, half out, not sure if she should move or not. Then he called her name. Her heart skipped. You think it's funny to go around filming police officers and posting online? You think you're brave, he said, eyes locked on her, lips curling into a smirk. Why don't you come up here and show everyone how brave you really are? The room went still. No one laughed. No one breathed. The air cracked with tension. She didn't move. He gestured sharply. Now. Reluctantly, she walked toward him, her eyes darting across a sea of faces, classmates, teachers, coaches, all staring. And then, the clippers. He pulled out a pair of electric hair clippers from his belt. Not a weapon. But it may as well have been. This is what happens when you break the rules. When you disrespect the law. When you think your phone makes you powerful, he said, stepping behind her, turning the clippers on. Buzzing filled the room. A sickening, vibrating hum that drilled into every ear. No, please, she muttered, trying to turn, but he held her shoulder. You want to act grown? Then take the consequences like an adult. And just like that, he pressed the clippers to her head. The sound of hair being stripped from her scalp was swallowed by the stunned silence of the crowd. Gasps, muffled sobs, a phone falling to the ground. Her arms froze. Her eyes blurred. She felt cold air hit her skin where her braids once danced. Her crown, ripped off in front of hundreds. Not by a stranger in a dark alley, but by a uniformed man in a school hallway. He finished and stepped back, holding a handful of her braids like a trophy. Let that be a lesson, he said. The principal stood by. The teachers did nothing. The students watched, some frozen, some filming. And then, a scream echoed from the back door. The kind of scream that makes your stomach turn before you even see who it belongs to. A man. Big. Fast. Furious. Uniform wrapped tight over a broad chest. His boots pounded the cafeteria floor like thunder. His face, unreadable. But his eyes, those eyes were fire. That was her father. And that moment? That was the last moment the cop would ever feel untouchable again. Because what no one in that school, not the students, not the teachers, not even the smirking principal, realized was that this girl wasn't just another student. Her father wasn't just another parent. He was a United States Navy SEAL. And he had seen the entire thing. From the parking lot. Through the cafeteria windows. He saw his daughter's pain. He saw her humiliation. And now. Now he was walking toward the man who took her dignity with a buzzing blade, and vengeance was in his blood. But that confrontation was just the beginning. The story doesn't end with a fight. It begins with one. Because within hours, the video hit the internet. Millions watched in disbelief as a young black girl stood frozen while a cop stripped away her identity, strand by strand, smile by smile. The clip went viral. The outrage spread like wildfire. And when investigators started digging, they found this wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. Just the first time he was caught. The girl's father didn't just fight back physically. He fought with every ounce of tactical, legal, and psychological warfare he was trained to use. He didn't just want justice. He wanted to tear down the system that allowed this man to walk into a school and humiliate a child without blinking. Lawsuits were filed. Careers collapsed. Secrets exploded. But that's not even the twist. Because what happened next, what really came to light, was something no one saw coming. Not the school board. Not the police department. Not even her father. So the question is, what happens when the truth is uglier than the crime? What if the cop wasn't acting alone? And what if the biggest betrayal didn't come from a man in uniform, but from someone even closer? Stay with us. You need to hear how this ends. To every black viewer watching this, we see you, we hear you, and we stand with you. On this channel, Plow of Twist, we do not tolerate racism in any form. Our stories aim to shine a light on injustice and empower voices that the world needs to hear. Now, buckle up. What you're about to hear is more than just a story, it's a powerful twist of fate. If you believe in stories that speak truth, strength, and justice, hit that subscribe button and let's grow this movement together. Enjoy the story. Savannah Cole was the kind of girl who didn't just walk into a room, she entered with purpose. 14 years old, sharp-eyed, and steady-voiced, she had a way of making people listen without even trying. Her skin was deep and radiant, her box braids a bold expression of self, blue and gold extensions woven through with care, beads clicking softly when she moved. She had inherited her mother's gentle strength and her father's unshakable discipline, a rare balance of grace and grit. She wasn't the loudest kid in school, but when Savannah spoke, people turned. Not because she demanded attention, but because her words always came from a place of conviction. She was a student, yes, but she was also a force in motion, a teenager with the quiet defiance of someone who knew her worth in a world that tried, too often, to make her forget it. Savannah lived in Norfolk, Virginia, a coastal city heavy with military presence and Southern legacy. A place where American flags waved proudly from porches and lawn signs shouted about politics louder than the people who lived behind them. The schools were a reflection of that same dynamic, publicly funded, decently resourced, but buried under years of whispered prejudice and unspoken rules. Heritage High was no different. On paper, it was diverse. In reality, it was divided. You could feel it in the way certain students were monitored more closely than others. You could see it in who got called to the office for minor dress code violations and who got away with openly vaping in the hallway. You could hear it in the tone of voice teachers used, warm and patient with some, short and suspicious with others. Savannah noticed all of it. She didn't complain often, but she remembered everything. The snide comments about her attitude, the extra eyes on her when her hand stayed in her hoodie pocket too long, the way staff referred to her braids as a distraction. She remembered how her older cousin dropped out 2 years before because he was tired of being treated like a problem instead of a student. She remembered how her mother had to go to the school 3 times in one semester just to demand a fair grade review. Savannah kept a mental record of the wrongs, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. She wasn't angry. She was aware. And more than anything, she refused to be silent. Her mother, Rochelle, worked long shifts as a trauma nurse at the local hospital. The kind of woman who rarely sat down but always knew exactly where Savannah's missing socks were. Rochelle had eyes that never missed pain, even when it was buried beneath silence. Her love was steady, her warnings sharper than a blade. She'd told Savannah time and time again to keep her head low and pick her battles. Not because she didn't believe in justice, but because she'd seen too many people like her daughter, brilliant and bold, get swallowed by systems too powerful and too blind to care. Her father, Malcolm Cole, had a different philosophy. Malcolm had spent over a decade as a Navy SEAL, trained for operations that the world would never know about. He was methodical, precise, a man who spoke in short, weighted sentences and moved with the control of someone who had survived hell and come back sharper. He rarely raised his voice, but when he did, the air shifted. Savannah didn't know everything about his missions, she only knew that he'd once been gone for 6 months without a single call, and when he returned, he stood taller but smiled less. He loved her fiercely. Protected her with a presence that said more than words. At home, he was softer. He cooked breakfast every Sunday, never missed her basketball games, and insisted on inspecting her bike chain every Saturday. But even in that gentleness, there was always an edge. A quiet warning beneath every gesture that said, "I am always watching." Despite the differences in their parenting, both of Savannah's parents raised her with one unshakable principle: you are not what this world tries to make you believe you are. You are more. Always more. At school, Savannah had a tight circle: Nia, her best friend since 3rd grade, who loved poetry and had an older brother in college that they both admired. Javier, whose dad owned a car repair shop and always carried a deck of cards in his hoodie pocket. And Reggie, a quiet, observant kid who liked graphic novels and had an eye for video editing. Together, they balanced each other. They laughed, dreamed, vented about unfair teachers, and made jokes about cafeteria food. They were just kids. Kids trying to grow in a place that didn't always welcome their roots. But that changed the day Savannah pulled out her phone and hit record. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sun was fading through the school windows, painting soft streaks across the hallway floor. Savannah was headed to her science class when she heard the commotion outside. She stepped near the double doors just in time to see Officer Bradley, the campus resource officer, shoving a student to the ground. The kid was Reggie's younger cousin, a sweet 7th grader named Marcus who had just transferred in 2 weeks prior. The officer had him face down on the sidewalk, knee in his back, screaming about resisting. But Marcus wasn't moving. He was crying. And none of the staff, were doing anything. Savannah didn't hesitate. She reached into her backpack, opened the camera app, and started filming. She didn't speak. Didn't yell. She just recorded. For 48 seconds. Marcus was eventually let up, sobbing, his face red and bruised. The cop barked at him to go back inside, acting as if nothing happened. Later that night, Savannah showed the video to her mom. Rochelle looked horrified but composed. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she asked if Savannah had posted it. She hadn't. Rochelle nodded slowly and said, "Let me think." Malcolm, when he found out, barely reacted. He simply asked, "You kept the original?" She nodded. "Good. Hold on to it." The next day, the school buzzed with rumors. Students had started talking. Some said it was Marcus's fault. Others knew better. A few even guessed Savannah had caught it on video. And then the principal made an announcement: any students who record or share footage of school personnel without consent will face disciplinary action. It was directed at her. Even if they didn't say it. That same day, Officer Bradley looked at her a little too long during lunch duty. His smile too forced. His eyes too hard. Savannah knew. He knew. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was just how far he'd go. She thought it was over. That her silence, her choice not to post it publicly, had kept her safe. But Officer Bradley wasn't interested in being safe. He was interested in being feared. And 2 weeks later, when he was invited to speak at the school during a morning assembly about law enforcement and community, he saw his opportunity. He planned everything. Down to the moment. Down to the second. Down to the blade. And when it happened, when he humiliated her in front of everyone, stripped away her identity, tried to reduce her to nothing, he forgot one thing. Savannah Cole was not alone. And her father was watching. Savannah hadn't been back to school for 3 full days after what happened. Her scalp was still sore, not just from the clippers, but from the humiliation etched deep into her skin. The mirror was no longer a place she went to fix her hair or admire her outfits. It was a battlefield. She avoided it like a wound. Her room had turned quiet. Even her music, which usually filled every corner with beats and rhythm, had gone silent. The walls of her home, once her refuge, now felt like they were trying to squeeze the memory out of her. But the memory wouldn't go. It was glued to every blink, every breath. The cafeteria. The buzz. The laughter that came too late. The silence that came too early. And his voice, deep, cold, gleeful. It followed her like a shadow she couldn't peel off. Her mother had held her hand the night after. Not said much, because there was nothing to say. No words could erase that image. But she did kiss her on the cheek and whisper, "They tried to take something from you, but they didn't succeed. You still got you." Savannah didn't answer. She wasn't sure she believed that yet. She wanted to. She really wanted to. But how could she believe in herself when every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself from above, just standing there while it happened? Frozen. Powerless. Her father had been the only one who hadn't asked if she was okay. He didn't believe in asking questions when the answer was written all over someone's face. Instead, he fixed the garage punching bag and left a new pair of gloves beside her bed. She didn't touch them at first. But on the second night, when she couldn't sleep, she went downstairs. She punched until her arms went numb. Until the only thing she could hear was her own breathing. Until she finally cried. But the world outside didn't pause just because she was in pieces. By the 5th day, the school sent an email requesting a meeting with her parents. They called it a restorative conversation to address the incident. They refused to use the words that mattered. No one called it an attack. No one called it humiliation. No one called it racism. Just an unfortunate misunderstanding. Her mother rolled her eyes. Her father didn't blink. He replied with one sentence, "We'll be there." The meeting took place in the principal's office. Mr. Denton sat behind his oversized desk, palms flat, voice flat, eyes never quite meeting Savannah's. Beside him, Officer Bradley leaned back with that same smug tilt in his chair, chewing the end of a toothpick like he was bored. His badge still shined. Still clipped to his chest like nothing had happened. Rochelle crossed her legs slowly, jaw clenched. Malcolm sat silent, shoulders straight, eyes locked on Bradley's like he was memorizing the shape of his breathing. Denton cleared his throat and said, "First of all, we want to apologize for how things unfolded. It's been difficult for everyone involved. Our officer was under the impression that there had been a serious violation of conduct, a serious violation of conduct?" Rochelle snapped. "You're talking about a child. A child who was assaulted in front of her peers. On school grounds." Denton looked like he wanted to melt into his seat. "We understand that emotions are high, but this could have been handled better on both sides." Savannah raised her head. "What exactly do you think I did wrong?" The room went still. Denton hesitated, then glanced at Bradley, who spoke for the first time. "You filmed a police officer during an active safety situation. You distributed it without consent." Savannah narrowed her eyes. "I never posted it. I showed my mom." Bradley smiled. "And that's how rumors spread. One video, one parent, one group text. That's all it takes. You're not here to talk safety, Malcolm finally said, voice calm like a blade sliding from its sheath. You're here to intimidate a child. My child. Bradley scoffed. If I wanted to intimidate, you'd know. And then Malcolm stood. Not fast. Not threatening. Just deliberate. I do know. That was the end of the meeting. But it wasn't the end of the story. By the time they got home, Rochelle was on the phone with an attorney. Not just any attorney, one from D.C. who specialized in civil rights cases. A woman who didn't flinch when Rochelle described what happened. She just said, send me everything. Every clip. Every witness. Every document. We're going after them. Savannah stayed quiet through most of the calls, but something inside her had shifted. The shame had started to burn into anger. Not the kind that made you yell, but the kind that made you move. That made you act. She knew now that staying silent had never protected her. It had just made it easier for them to erase her. The moment that changed everything came on a Saturday. Nia came over, holding her phone out like it was on fire. You need to see this, she said, eyes wide. It was a screen recording. Someone had uploaded a video. Not the cafeteria one, Savannah had deleted that weeks ago, but the one from outside. The one where Officer Bradley had slammed Marcus into the concrete. It had leaked. And it was spreading fast. The caption read, "This is the man who shaved a black girl's head in front of her entire school." By evening, the video had hit 300,000 views. By Sunday, it was on the local news. By Monday, national outlets were picking it up. Protests started outside Heritage High. Not riots. Not chaos. Organized resistance. Parents. Students. Local pastors. Former alumni. People held up signs that said, "We stand with Savannah," and "Protect our children." Some carried mirrors. Others carried clippers, wrapped in red tape. But not everyone was on her side. A counter-movement began to rise, one that defended Officer Bradley. Said he was just doing his job. Called him a hero under fire. Social media split in two. Comment sections filled with rage and disbelief. Some people accused Savannah of setting him up. Others called her brave. Threats flooded her inbox. Her family's address was posted online. And through it all, she kept asking herself one question: why me? That night, she walked into the garage. Malcolm was working on the punching bag again. She stood in the doorway. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said. He didn't turn. "Doesn't matter. It found you." She stepped forward. "What if I can't handle it?" "You already are." The next day, the school board held an emergency meeting. Reporters crowded the front steps. Inside, testimonies were heard. Savannah didn't speak, yet, but Marcus's mother did. She cried through most of it, but she was clear. Her son still woke up in the middle of the night screaming. He still flinched when he saw police cars. The board nodded, took notes, promised to investigate. But Savannah knew what that meant. Delay. Denial. Distance. So she decided to speak. At the end of the meeting, she stepped up to the microphone. Her voice didn't shake. "You all sat here listening to pain like it's a podcast. Like it's entertainment. But I'm not a story. I'm a student. I go to your school. I followed every rule. I worked hard. And I got punished. Not because I did something wrong, but because I made someone uncomfortable. And I want to know, what are you going to do about it?" Silence. Then one person clapped. Then another. Then the room exploded. And somewhere in the back, Officer Bradley watched. Jaw tight. Hands clenched. But what he didn't know was that this was just the beginning. Because something else had surfaced. Something buried in old files. Something that tied his name to 3 other schools. 3 other students. 3 other videos. And this time, there would be no hiding. The day of the hearing felt heavier than any other. The air outside the district courthouse was damp with tension, not rain. The line of protesters stretched beyond the sidewalk, weaving between police tape and camera crews, their signs more furious than hopeful now. Justice for Savannah had become more than a chant, it had become a demand. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed over hard wooden benches, and the hum of whispers swelled as people found their seats. Savannah sat beside her parents, her hand loosely gripping the edge of the table in front of her. Her heart wasn't racing anymore. That had passed. What she felt now was colder, deeper, a quiet certainty that this moment wasn't just about her. It was about all the kids who never got to sit here, who never got to be heard. Officer Bradley sat across from her, stone-faced, a new lawyer at his side. He hadn't worn his uniform this time. Probably advised against it. The room was watching. Everyone was watching. And he knew it. He glanced at Savannah for a split second, but she didn't look away. She held his gaze just long enough to make sure he understood, "You don't own this anymore." The first part of the session was procedural, legal motions, school board representatives giving vague statements, nervous glances exchanged between attorneys. Savannah stayed silent through it all. She waited. She knew what was coming. The room didn't. The district's lawyer tried to shift the narrative toward policy miscommunication, once again framing the incident as an overstep rather than an act of humiliation. It was clear they hoped to steer the focus toward regulations and away from real accountability. But then Savannah's attorney stood, calm and deliberate, and announced they had new evidence to present. That's when everything changed. The screen on the wall lit up. A video began to play. Not the cafeteria clip. Not the footage of Marcus from outside the school. This was different. The timestamp was from 3 years ago. A different school. A different student. The video showed Officer Bradley grabbing a young black boy by the collar, slamming him against a locker, yelling something muffled. The boy didn't fight. He just cried. Gasps rippled across the room. A school board member whispered something to the person next to them. The lawyer turned to the panel. "This is from Grover Middle School. The student's name is Evan Banks. 12 years old at the time. The officer in the video is the same man sitting here today." Savannah sat perfectly still. Another clip played. 2 years ago. Different school. A hallway. A young girl with curly hair backed into a wall while Officer Bradley loomed over her, yelling, pointing. The footage shook slightly, someone had filmed it from behind a cracked door. The lawyer stepped forward again. This was North Point Intermediate. The student's name was Layla Monroe. Officer Bradley was removed from that school under quiet administrative reassignment. No charges. No reports. A third clip followed. One from just last year. A security cam recording, muted, showing a boy being dragged by his backpack across a gymnasium floor. The lawyer looked directly at the panel. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern of targeted aggression against black children, concealed by bureaucratic silence. The silence in the room was deafening. Savannah's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of being believed. From the weight of knowing she wasn't alone in this. That there were others, too many others, who had been hurt the same way and swept aside. Then came the final piece. The lawyer turned to Savannah. "Would you be willing to read your statement now?" She nodded. She stood slowly, taking the single sheet of paper she had written the night before. Her voice was clear, but each word carried the sharpness of every moment that led her to this place. "I didn't ask to be part of this. I didn't want to become a headline. I just wanted to be a kid. To go to school. To learn. But someone decided I wasn't allowed to just exist quietly. Someone decided that because I stood up, I needed to be punished. And you all let that happen. You watched it. You allowed it. And you're sitting here now, not asking if it was wrong, but asking if it was justifiable. So let me make this clear, it was never about rules. It was never about safety. It was about power. And I'm here to tell you, you don't get to have it anymore. As she sat down, she didn't look at anyone. Not her parents. Not the cameras. Not even the panel. But Officer Bradley shifted. For the first time, his face cracked. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was something closer to realization. The beginning of a fall. The chairwoman cleared her throat and announced a recess while the panel reviewed the new materials. People stood, murmurs growing louder. Reporters rushed to the hallways. Outside, the crowd started chanting louder. Rochelle leaned toward Savannah, her voice soft. You did it. Malcolm remained silent, but he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. No words were needed. In the hallway, Officer Bradley tried to slip away unnoticed, but someone blocked his path. It was Evan Banks's father. The man stood tall, expression tight. You remember my son? Bradley blinked. The father didn't wait for an answer. He stopped talking for 6 months. Couldn't even walk past a cop car without crying. And now I see you did the same thing to another kid. Another daughter. You think you're untouchable. But look around, man. Your time is up. Bradley tried to push past, but the hallway filled with more parents, familiar faces from familiar stories. The ones who had been ignored. The ones whose kids had been labeled difficult just for daring to speak. Savannah watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. She didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. This wasn't victory. It was exposure. It was just the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. But she felt something shift. Deep in her chest. A tiny flame that hadn't gone out, even when they tried to humiliate her into silence. That flame was growing now. And the truth? The real truth? It wasn't done burning. Because what Savannah didn't know yet, what no one in that building knew, was that there was one more video. One more voice ready to speak. And that voice would change everything. The room hadn't yet settled when the door at the back creaked open. The recessed murmurs paused, just for a second. A woman entered, tall, late 30s, tightly coiled hair pinned back, dark blazer buttoned to the top. She didn't speak right away. She walked straight to the front of the hearing room and handed a folder to the clerk, who blinked, confused. This wasn't on the docket, he muttered. She leaned in and whispered something, too low to catch. A moment later, the clerk stood and approached the chairwoman, passing her the folder. Something shifted in the air. The panel members leaned in, flipping through the contents, their expressions changing, first confusion, then tension. One of them looked directly at Officer Bradley, their mouth tightening. Another covered her lips with her hand. Savannah turned slowly toward the front as the woman cleared her throat and introduced herself. My name is Celeste Ward. I'm here to submit a sworn statement and supporting footage regarding an incident involving Officer Bradley from my time at Crescent Ridge Academy. I was a student there 6 years ago. The room stilled. I never came forward before because I didn't think anyone would believe me. I was 15. He was a cop. I thought maybe I had misunderstood what happened. Maybe it was my fault. But watching what happened to Savannah, and to the other students, it's made me realize that silence only protects the ones who hurt us. She paused and looked directly at Savannah. You made me remember I have a voice. Savannah blinked hard, throat tightening. Celeste looked back at the panel. I found an old backup drive last night with footage I saved but never showed. It was recorded by a friend who used to help me film our school video blogs. We caught him in the hallway with a student named Devin James. He grabbed him, dragged him out of class. We followed, quietly. We caught what he did. And we caught what he said. The screen lit up again. The footage was grainy but audible. Officer Bradley had the boy by the back of the neck, pushing him into a janitor's closet. The door creaked as it closed, but the camera caught every word through the crack. Bradley's voice was sharp, filled with venom. You think you're smarter than me? You think the rules don't apply to your kind? The boy whimpered something, barely audible. Bradley hissed back, you'll learn respect if I have to beat it into you. The footage ended with the sound of a slap and the boy crying. The courtroom didn't gasp this time. It didn't have to. The silence was more powerful than any noise. It felt like the oxygen had been vacuumed from the room. Celeste's hands trembled, but she kept speaking. They talked about normal things, music, homework, weekend plans, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper flowing between them. Trust, broken and repaired. Javier leaned back against the bench, eyes squinting toward the sun. You ever think about how everything feels the same, but it's not, he asked. Like, we're sitting here just like always, but everything's different now. Nia nodded. That's what happens when someone decides to stop letting the world walk all over them. Reggie looked at Savannah. You scared the hell out of them. Savannah laughed softly. I scared myself. They all laughed, and for a moment, it felt like childhood again, uncertain, awkward, but not yet destroyed. That night, Savannah sat with Rochelle in the kitchen, their tea mugs warming their hands while the overhead light flickered slightly above them. Rochelle stared into her cup for a long time. I haven't told you this, she began slowly, but when I was your age, I got stopped by a cop walking home from school. He said I looked like someone who'd stolen something. I hadn't even realized how scared I was until I saw my reflection in the window. I was shaking. I told my mom, and she said, just keep your head down, baby. The world ain't gonna change for us. Savannah listened quietly, heart tightening. Rochelle looked up at her, eyes full of unshed tears. But you made the world change a little. Even if it tried to break you first. Savannah reached across the table and took her mother's hand. I didn't do it alone. Rochelle smiled faintly. No. But you were the one who stood up. Elsewhere in the city, Celeste and the Echo Project were gaining momentum. More survivors came forward. Stories began to flood their inbox, some from years ago, some from just last month. Former teachers joined. A retired principal shared a journal of notes she'd kept, too afraid to ever submit them. Savannah met with them regularly now, not as the face of the movement, but as a listener, a connector. She had begun helping students draft statements, write letters, prepare for board meetings. She didn't talk much about herself anymore. This wasn't about her pain now, it was about making sure no one else had to carry theirs alone. But not everything was progress. The legal team representing Officer Bradley launched a counterattack. They filed a motion accusing the district of defamation, claiming Savannah's video had been maliciously edited to manipulate public perception. They requested a retrial. The news spread fast. Rochelle read the headline aloud in the living room, her voice hardening. They're trying to make him the victim now. Malcolm said nothing, his face unreadable. Savannah didn't react either. She simply picked up her phone and opened the Echo Project message board. Let them, she said. The truth isn't scared of a courtroom. But inside, she was shaken. Not because she thought he would win. But because she knew how systems worked, how they twisted facts and buried victims under paperwork and bureaucracy. That night, as she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, replaying the hallway, the cafeteria, the courtroom. She remembered the weight of silence before the scream. She remembered how cold the clippers felt against her scalp. She remembered how it felt to be watched by everyone and protected by no one. But more than anything, she remembered what it felt like to see someone else finally speak. The next morning, Savannah made a decision. She contacted Devin James, the boy from Celeste's footage. He agreed to meet at a local library. He was older now, college sophomore, studying criminal justice. When he saw her, he smiled softly. "Didn't think I'd ever see you in person," he said. "I watched your speech. Twice. You were fire." She smiled. "I had no idea anyone would even remember it." Devin shrugged. "People remember courage. Especially when it costs something." They talked for nearly an hour, about his transfer, about how long it took him to trust anyone in authority again, about how for years, he blamed himself for what happened. Savannah listened carefully. She told him about the counter-lawsuit, about the retrial request. He leaned forward. "They're trying to wear you down. That's what they always do. But they're not ready for what happens when the people they hurt start linking arms." When Savannah returned home, she found her father in the garage. He was fixing the hinges on the back door, the same way he had done so many times before. She stood quietly, watching him work. After a moment, she spoke. "If they ask me to testify again, I'll do it. But this time, I'm going to read every story. I'm going to speak for all of them. Not just for me." Malcolm didn't look up. "Then you better get ready. Because they're going to throw everything at you." Savannah nodded. "Let them." That weekend, Savannah attended a community roundtable organized by the city council. Parents, activists, and school board members filled the rec center. She sat near the back, listening as people shared stories, frustration, and ideas for reform. At one point, an older woman stood, her hands shaking as she held the mic. "When I was little," she said, "we had to fight just to be in the same building. And now our children are still fighting to be safe inside it. I'm tired. But seeing what that girl did, it gave me hope again." She didn't say Savannah's name. She didn't need to. The room erupted in applause, some people standing. Savannah stayed seated, heart pounding. It was the kind of moment that didn't ask for a speech, it asked for a promise. Later, as she walked home under the fading streetlights, she felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief. Not triumph. But a quiet kind of power. A steady sense of belonging to something bigger than fear. The road ahead was still long. There would be more hearings. More resistance. More choices to make. But something had shifted, for her, and for all the others who had finally decided to be loud. And somewhere in her heart, Savannah knew the final chapter wasn't about what had been taken from her. It was about what she chose to build from the ashes. The final ruling came on a calm Friday morning, the kind of day that, from the outside, looked like any other. But for Savannah, this wasn't just another morning, it was the close of a chapter she never asked to be written, and one she would carry with her forever. The courtroom was full once again, though this time there were fewer whispers, fewer cameras, and more anticipation that pulsed through the air like electricity. When the verdict was read, official dismissal of the counter-lawsuit and permanent barring of Officer Bradley from any form of public service, the room didn't erupt, it exhaled. For the victims who had waited years, for the families who finally felt heard, for the children who could now walk into school with one less fear on their back, it was a silent victory laced with power. Bradley's fate was sealed not just by his actions, but by the courage of the voices that rose against him. His name would not be remembered as a protector, but as a warning. And as he was escorted out in silence, stripped of title and influence, not a single eye looked at him with sympathy. He left unnoticed, forgotten by the same system that once shielded him. But the story didn't end in that courtroom. It continued in the lives of those who chose to step forward. Celeste's Echo Project grew into a nationwide network. And what's at stake if we keep speaking up? She swallowed hard. So what do we do? Malcolm leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. We keep standing. Even when they try to knock us down again. Especially then. Meanwhile, Celeste had gone public. Her face was now part of the wave too, her old footage shared across social media, interviews on national platforms. She started a coalition with a few other survivors, former students, parents, teachers who had once been afraid to speak. They called it the Echo Project. Their mission was clear: to collect, document, and expose every incident of institutional abuse swept under the rug by the school system. Savannah was invited to join, but she hesitated. She wanted to help, but she was still just a girl trying to breathe again. Every time she opened her mouth in public, it felt like she was speaking for 1,000 people, and she didn't always know what to say. The dilemma hit hardest when the district offered her a private settlement. A large sum of money. No admission of guilt. No legal charges pursued against the school. Just a payout in exchange for silence. Rochelle read the letter twice, fingers trembling. Malcolm refused to even touch it. "It's hush money," he said flatly. "They're betting on her being too tired to keep fighting." But Rochelle saw it differently. Maybe this is a way to rebuild. Maybe it's a tool, not a bribe. Savannah sat at the kitchen table staring at the paper, feeling like her entire life was suspended above it. This wasn't just about money. It was about what it meant to say yes or no. Accepting meant security, but it also meant that some doors might quietly close, some questions might never be answered. Declining meant the fight would stretch on. More hearings. More exposure. More damage. And maybe, more danger. She thought about it for days. And then, she asked to meet with Marcus. They sat across from each other at a small park bench. He was doing better, smiling more, talking again, but the weight of what had happened still lingered in his voice. She told him about the offer. He didn't know what to say at first. Then he shrugged. "If you take it, will it help you sleep? Or will it just be quiet?" She laughed softly. "You sound like my dad." Marcus smiled. "That's probably a good thing." Back at school, rumors began swirling again. Some said Savannah was suing the entire district. Others said she was about to move. Some believed she'd signed a deal already. A few students, emboldened by her fight, started speaking out about smaller injustices, discrimination in grading, harassment from certain staff members, policies that punished black and brown students more severely. But for every student who spoke up, there were others who rolled their eyes, tired of hearing about race, tired of feeling uncomfortable. Teachers were split. Some quietly supported her. Others distanced themselves, afraid of being implicated, afraid of scrutiny. One day, Savannah was called to the principal's office again. But this time, it was different. Mr. Denton wasn't alone. A representative from the superintendent's office sat beside him. They offered her a formal apology, scripted, nervous, practiced. Then they told her something else: Officer Bradley had been officially terminated. Not suspended. Not reassigned. Fired. And more, he was under federal investigation, with multiple civil suits filed against him. The department that had once shielded him had turned its back to save itself. He was, finally, alone. After the meeting, Savannah sat outside on the school steps. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just sat. Breathing. Letting the moment settle. But peace didn't come easily. A few days later, an anonymous message was left in her locker. No name. No return address. Just a note scrawled in red ink. You got what you wanted. Don't push it. It didn't surprise her. What surprised her was how little it scared her. She folded the note carefully, walked straight to the office, and handed it to the administration. You'll want to log this, she said. Because if anything happens to me, I want it on record that I told you first. That night, Savannah sat with her parents. The settlement was still on the table. But now there was something more. The Echo Project had offered her a formal role, not as a speaker, but as a youth advisor. It came with no money, no glamour. Just responsibility. And a chance to keep doing something meaningful. She looked at the offer, then at her parents. "I don't want to be a symbol," she said. "But maybe I don't have to be one. Maybe I can just be loud enough to make space for someone else." Rochelle smiled. That's all it ever takes. And for the first time in weeks, Savannah allowed herself to dream again. Not just about safety. But about justice that lasted. About change that stuck. About truth that didn't need to be shouted to be heard. Because she had learned something powerful in that courthouse, in that cafeteria, in every breath between humiliation and healing, power doesn't always look like a badge or a gavel or a podium. Sometimes, power is the choice to keep standing. Even after everything tries to break you. And Savannah Cole was still standing. It was a Thursday morning when Savannah walked back into Heritage High with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. The wind was crisp, the hallways quiet, almost too quiet, like the school itself was holding its breath. Her steps echoed with a strange combination of defiance and fatigue. She wasn't walking in to make a point, she was walking in because she could, because after everything, this place no longer held the same power over her. The whispers were still there, low voices tucked into locker corners, sideways glances pretending not to be stares, but she was no longer measuring her worth by their silence. As she passed through the main hallway, she saw the new posters on the wall, district-mandated reforms, zero tolerance for harassment, visible complaint boxes, contact information for a new student rights liaison. Words that sounded good, looked official, but Savannah knew the real work wouldn't happen on paper. It would happen in the moments when no one was watching, in the decisions made behind office doors, in how they treated the next kid brave enough to speak up. In English class, Mr. Chandler, one of the few teachers who had quietly stood by her during everything, gave her a subtle nod as she walked in. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said enough. After class, he caught up to her in the hallway. "You know, Savannah," he said with a gentleness she didn't expect, "when I was your age, I saw something bad happen to someone and I said nothing. I thought staying quiet meant staying safe. I've regretted that silence every day since." She didn't respond right away. Then she said, "You're not the only one who stayed quiet." He nodded. "Maybe not. But you're the one who changed that." She looked away, swallowing the lump in her throat. There was something about hearing that from a teacher, from someone who had been part of the system and was now acknowledging his place in its silence. It chipped away at the numbness she'd carried, made room for something like healing. That afternoon, during lunch, she sat outside with Mia, Javier, and Reggie. It was the first time they'd all been together again without cameras or microphones or legal documents on the table. "They told us Devin got transferred to a behavioral program because he was disruptive. His mom tried to file a complaint, but nothing came of it. She moved the family out of state 6 months later. We never heard from him again." One of the board members pushed back from the table. How was none of this ever reported?" Savannah's lawyer stepped forward. "Because you never looked. Because no one listened. Because every time something like this happened, you made the victims feel like they were the problem." Bradley's lawyer stood abruptly, hands up. "These are unverified claims, old footage, none of this proves anything beyond circumstantial," Celeste snapped, voice firm. "Then subpoena Devin. He'll talk now. I already called him. He's ready." Bradley shifted in his seat. For the first time, he looked truly shaken. His posture deflated, eyes darting around as if looking for the nearest exit. The composure he had held like armor now cracked in full view of the public. Malcolm stood from his seat at the back and walked slowly to the front, stopping beside Savannah's lawyer. The room turned to him with respect, silence falling deeper than before. He addressed the panel directly, each word crisp, clear, calm. "You've seen the video. You've heard the stories. But let me ask you something simple. If this man weren't wearing a badge, if he were a teacher, a coach, even a stranger off the street, how long would it have taken you to remove him from the building? No one answered. He turned to Bradley, not with rage, but with something colder. You made my daughter feel small. You took her hair, her pride, and thought it would break her. You wanted to punish her for exposing you. But all you did was light a fire. And now, you're going to feel every inch of that flame. Bradley tried to speak, but no words came out. Malcolm turned back to the board. This isn't about policy anymore. It's about who you are when no one's watching. It's about what you let continue, because silence is a decision. Savannah stood beside him now. She wasn't shaking. Her voice came strong, steady. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking you to fix what already happened. I'm asking you to stop letting it happen again. The chairwoman whispered something to the other panelists. Papers shuffled. A few nods exchanged. Then she leaned forward, gripping the microphone. Officer Bradley is hereby placed under full suspension pending federal investigation. The board is formally recommending charges be pursued by the district attorney's office. Effective immediately, he is banned from entering any educational institution under this jurisdiction. A wave of relief, anger, and disbelief swept through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. Celeste covered her mouth with her hand, exhaling as if she had waited 6 years to breathe. Savannah stood still. The moment didn't feel like victory yet. It felt like survival. Bradley was escorted out of the room by 2 deputies. As he passed by Savannah, their eyes met for the last time. There was no defiance in his face now, just the hollow stare of a man who had built his power on silence and finally found himself surrounded by voices too loud to ignore. Outside, the crowd roared. Signs lifted higher. Strangers cried. Cars honked in support. Malcolm, Rochelle, and Savannah stepped into the sunlight together. The warmth hit Savannah's face like something she hadn't felt in weeks. She inhaled deeply. For the first time since the assembly, she felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. Celeste approached her on the courthouse steps. Thank you, she said softly. I didn't know how much I needed this until today. Savannah looked at her. You gave me more than I gave you. No, Celeste said, shaking her head. You made me remember that we're not powerless. They hugged. A long, quiet hug. Not for the cameras. Not for the crowd. Just for them. Later that night, Savannah sat alone in her room, the lights low, her fingers tracing the ridges of her growing hair in the mirror. It wasn't long yet, but it was coming back. And so was she. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Because power doesn't disappear. It moves. It hides. It waits. And somewhere in the city, in a quiet office or a forgotten file cabinet, the next truth was already waiting to be found. And she would be ready. For days after the hearing, the city buzzed with a nervous kind of energy. It wasn't celebration exactly, and it wasn't closure either. It was something messier, an awakening. Headlines shifted from carefully worded reports to deeply personal interviews, from numbers and statistics to names and faces. Savannah's face appeared on the front page of local papers and national news segments, not as a victim, not even just as a student, but as the catalyst for a reckoning. Still, the attention felt like a double-edged blade. Every post, every interview, every camera outside her house only reminded her of why this all started. She hadn't asked to be a symbol. She had just wanted to be safe. But now that she had become something bigger, she couldn't just step away. The people writing her name in hashtags didn't know what it cost her to walk into school again. They didn't see the stares, the silence in the hallway, the way some kids avoided eye contact like she was contagious. The truth was, not everyone wanted her to win. Some teachers now treated her like she was dangerous, like she'd broken some unwritten rule by fighting back. And among the students, there were those who whispered things behind cupped hands, who rolled their eyes, who muttered about drama and attention. They weren't brave enough to say it out loud, but Savannah could hear them anyway. It wasn't just the school. The consequences of what had happened stretched further than any of them expected. The school board had launched a formal investigation into all current and former school resource officers across the district. Officers were pulled from posts. Parents showed up to school meetings in numbers no one had seen before. Some were angry at the system. Others were angry at her. Anonymous emails started arriving in the district inboxes, detailing old incidents buried and forgotten. Stories of kids transferred, silenced, punished for speaking up. Savannah's name was now tied to every one of those stories. The pressure was relentless. And then came the biggest blow. Malcolm received a letter from the Navy. His security clearance had been flagged. The Internal Affairs Division wanted a full review of his involvement in the courthouse confrontation, claiming his presence and behavior during an open legal proceeding could reflect poorly on the integrity of the uniform. It wasn't an expulsion, not yet, but it was a warning. A threat wrapped in protocol. One more reminder that systems protect their own. That night, Savannah sat on the back porch with her father. The sun was just slipping below the trees, casting a golden hue over the yard. Malcolm stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "They're going to try to make this about me," he said, voice low. "They'll spin it like I crossed a line, like I couldn't separate my role as a father from my duty as a soldier." Savannah looked over at him, her eyes steady. "But that's exactly why you did what you did. Because you're both." He didn't answer right away. Then he looked at her. "This isn't just about justice anymore. This is about survival. Ours. Theirs." Chapters opened in nearly every major city, staffed by students and mentors who understood what it meant to live with invisible wounds. With funding from donations and partnerships with advocacy groups, they began training student leaders on how to document incidents, navigate legal pathways, and demand equity. Celeste became a leading voice on national news panels and policy discussions, but she never let the spotlight distract her. Her work was rooted in healing and truth. And every time she spoke publicly, she mentioned Savannah's name, not to glorify her, but to remind the world who lit the fuse. Marcus, once afraid to walk the halls of his school, joined the Echo Youth team and began working on storytelling workshops for middle school kids. He wasn't the loudest, but his presence had weight. His story, once buried in silence, became a catalyst for young students who saw themselves in him. He found strength in showing others how to turn fear into fuel, pain into power. Mr. Chandler, the English teacher who once watched quietly from the sidelines, submitted his resignation a few months later, not out of guilt, but to join a nonprofit dedicated to racial justice in education. In his final letter to Savannah, he wrote, "I spent too long being quiet. Watching you taught me that silence is not neutrality, it's consent. It's time I use my voice, too." As for Malcolm, the investigation into his conduct at the courthouse was dropped. A formal apology was never issued, but the silence from his command spoke volumes. They knew the truth, even if they wouldn't say it out loud. He eventually transitioned into a veteran advocacy role, working with young black servicemen struggling to navigate systems built to exclude them. In his own quiet way, he channeled his discipline and strength into mentorship, shaping a new generation with the same precision he once brought to the battlefield. Rochelle returned to her night shifts at the hospital, but her heart had changed. She started hosting small community support groups for mothers raising black children in the public school system. It was her way of giving back, not just advice, but comfort, wisdom, and the strength that only mothers who've walked through fire can offer. Her voice, once reserved for protecting her own, became a balm for others. And Savannah? Savannah Cole didn't go back to being the same girl. Because she wasn't the same. She finished high school not as a survivor, but as a leader. She accepted the youth advisor role at Echo and later launched a national student-led campaign that pushed for mandatory anti-bias training in schools across multiple districts. She traveled across the country to speak, not about trauma, but about transformation. Her story wasn't about a single act of violence anymore, but about the revolution born from the refusal to stay quiet. Years later, she stood on the TEDx stage, not as a symbol, but as herself. Calm. Strong. No script in her hand. Just truth in her chest. She looked out into the crowd, paused, then said, "I used to think justice was about punishment. But I've learned justice is about restoration. It's about giving voice back to those who were silenced, dignity back to those who were shamed, and power back to those who were told they had none." The applause that followed wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had ever stood up and refused to shrink. Now, to you, yes, you, listening to this story, wherever you are in the world, take a second to breathe in what you just heard. Let it sit with you. Let it settle. Because stories like Savannah's are not fiction. They are mirrors. They reflect the systems we live in, the choices we make, and the silence we allow. Ask yourself this: when faced with injustice, do you step back, or do you step forward? When someone near you is stripped of their voice, do you become another echo of silence, or do you become the one who says enough? And more than that, how will you use your voice? Think about your school. Your workplace. Your community. There is a Savannah there, maybe more than one. And maybe they haven't spoken yet. Maybe they're waiting to know if someone will stand with them when they finally do. If this story moved you, challenged you, opened your eyes in any way, don't let it end here. Leave a comment. Share what this story meant to you. Tell us what part made you pause. And most importantly, ask yourself what you're willing to do with what you now understand. And hey, if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that twist, shock, and speak truth, subscribe to Tales of Twist. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell the ones that need to be told.